to a different style video, where we travel, but it's less of a travel guide and more of an adventure through history. Today, I want to take you on a journey into the large coal and oil-fueled iron beasts that helped shape and tame these wild and vast mountains to what they are today. We will be traveling from modern to old train projects, networks, and effects to get just one piece of coal worth of an entire hopper of history in this video. I'm very excited to make this and see what everybody thinks. It is a video I'll hopefully turn into an entire series of historic ventures. So join me today to explore the mighty and modern Union Station in Denver, the Colorado Train Museum in Golden, a pit stop for a historic tale in Bailey, and finally, a look into a current project trying to bring life back to a once hectic and busy valley, which was a keystone stop for the Southern Colorado rail history. Let's jump on in! At the most northern light rail station from Denver, 124th and Eastlake. All right, behind me is Denver's current light rail system, and we're at the most northern point of the light rail system at 124th station. So let's take this train down to the historic Union Station. In the heart of Denver. Let's go around front and check out the sights. We have made it to Union Station. This is originally made in 1880, but in the early 1900s there was a pretty big fire and they actually had to rebuild it in 1914. Whoa. Had to fact check myself here. The station was rebuilt, but in 1914 it was redesigned to its current stature to accommodate more travelers to the area. Let's get back to it. And on the front of the building here, you can see 1880 and 1914, kind of signifying that rebuild and that fire. And then in the early 2000s, it did get another kind of major restoration as well. So during that fire, there actually used to be right behind me a massive clock tower that spanned way above the building, but unfortunately, it's no longer here. But this place is full of history, and it's actually a really cool thing to check out and kind of explore while you're downtown here. So let's head on in and show you the inside. This modern station within an old shell is a major stopping spot for anyone traveling through Denver today, just like it was 100 years ago. The grounds of the station still act as a major transport hub, with most light rail lines taking you outside of Denver, starting and ending here in a major bus station below ground. This is also a major stop for Amtrak to take you throughout the United States. This station acted as a key to the West for much of the passenger rail travel in the late 1800s and early 1900s, with hordes of tourists seeking the untamed beauty of the western United States, prospectors wanting to luck out and strike it rich with that lucky golden nugget, or people looking for a new home where they heard a lot of new opportunities awaited. Without this mighty station, Denver may not even be close to the city it is today. The peak of travelers coming through this station was in the 1940s and 50s, where the station would warmly or coldly welcome 50,000 or more new people a day. But all in all, today it is well worth at least walking through and checking out this grand station. Now that we have ridden on and explored some of today's railroads in Colorado, let's start our journey through the past. About 20 to 30 minutes down the highway from Union Station, heading into Golden, Colorado, is the Colorado Railroad Museum, housing a large collection of engines and cars that helped conquer this wild land. And welcome to Golden, Colorado. So right behind me is actually one of the most famous or most photographed trains out there. This used to run in California, Colorado, and I think it was Chicago, but did a ton of trips. And this thing has been featured in a lot of documentaries and pictures and whatever, just with this famous color scheme and all that. Well, yeah, as you can see, that 5771, look out for like pictures of just this in general and that number up top. This thing is huge. But welcome to the next stop on our historic trip today, and we are in the Colorado Train Museum. But I have about 5 minutes before that train loads up. I just got here, so let's get over there right now.
Whoa! Barely made it on. Let's talk about some of the history stored here as we take a couple laps around the museum. Overall, it offers an array of railroad history, with a good-sized collection of railroad memorabilia, cars, and engines throughout the decades. Some of the major points of interest here include a library, small train ride loop that we are currently on, roundhouse with a turntable, and quite a bit more. Now let's jump into some of the stories this place can tell, starting off with this little but interesting engine right here. More specifically known as the M&PP number 1, because I know everybody here knows exactly what that means. It's actually a very important piece to the state's history that joined the museum fleet in 1979, fresh off the cold and windy Pikes Peak. Well, maybe not fresh off the peaks, because this specific locomotive had been retired at about 1938. These trains are extremely unique because they are built for a cog railway, which allows it to travel up much steeper grades than a traditional engine. The Pikes Peak Railway is one of only a few in the United States currently operating today. What makes this train special, there is a large cog in the middle of the train that helps drive the train up the tracks. Instead of the power coming from the wheels, it's coming from a huge gear that walks itself up the tracks. But we can go much more in depth about this on another video. One other unique locomotive that was essential to kick-starting this area of the Rockies are the two we are passing right now. These are another unique style steam engine that can handle significantly higher grades than most for working in the steep areas of the mountains. They are all-wheel drive, which means every wheel is under power, and were mainly used for transporting materials to and from hard-to-reach mines and lumber areas, essential to supplying goods and raw resources to the towns below in the valleys, which then spread these resources across the entire country. Let's finish up the ride and take a look into the roundhouse, where a steam engine is being prepped for a special event in the coming weeks. Let's check out a couple cars and trains on the way down, like this old sleeper car for workers on a train to get some shut-eye on those long journeys, an old postal car that you can even take a look inside, and a whole bunch more to see. I'll leave the rest for you to explore when you visit. The opposite side of the museum from where you load up for the train ride is where the turntable and roundhouse is located. This is where active restorations and maintenance happen on the large collection here. The staff do a great job at keeping these metal beasts alive and working for visitors to enjoy for hopefully the foreseeable future. It's about that time we keep chugging through history and make a pit stop for some grub and see how this little itty-bitty mountain town in Colorado has had an effect on the overall train history here. Welcome to Bailey, Colorado! With all of this walking and exploring, it's time to get a quick brunch at the Cutthroat Cafe in downtown Bailey, where I picked up a big old pancake, crispy breakfast sausage, and a little bit of homemade chili. Everything was tasty and everyone inside was very nice. Just across the street is a small historic district where we will check in on the ground about how this area had a pretty significant impact on how fresh foods made this long journey through this part of the country. As we continue this trip on, we are still in Bailey, just a little hop, skip, and a jump from lunch. It's a little historical park, but this land we stand on, plus across the river here, there's some hiking trails back in those woods that were donated by the McGraw family. And overall, it's pretty interesting. You got caboose right here. You got an old schoolhouse from the 1800s. You got a pair of cabins from the area-ish, kind of, from the 1800s as well. And then back here is a shed. I don't think the shed is as old, is super old. They built it to protect the equipment within the shed. So there is an old goods wagon and a lot of equipment and tools from when ice was a big industry for like cooling rail cars, or used as even air conditioning way back before we had the current AC we have today. And then if you look between the schoolhouse and this cabin here, that is actually another artifact from the ice lakes. Most of the ice during that era for Denver actually came out of this area here, just over near Fairplay. They made a couple dams and a couple lakes in that valley, and once the ice got to exactly 2 feet thick, they would scrape it all away, they would score it with this thing right here, and they would start chopping it up into blocks and ship it on out. And during that time, this was huge, because this was what allowed refrigerator cars to transport veggies and meats all over the place to keep them cool while they had their ride. Because before that,
veggies and meats and stuff, or mainly veggies, it would basically be more local. There wasn't that cool air in cars to keep the items fresh for longer periods of time. But to cap this little area off, this town is called Bailey because one of the original settlers in this little valley here, their last name was Bailey, but they had sold their land to the McGrawls, which eventually allowed this park to happen. So let's keep on trucking along here on this little history adventure.
The history journey continues into Como Depot, located at the mouth of Voorhees Pass. Well, that's at least how I think you pronounce that. That takes you up and over some of the mighty Rocky Mountains. The historical society that is currently restoring this property has a couple open houses a year to welcome the public to see the progress of the grounds. There are many projects going on at once here, so let's take a look inside and walk through this fascinating project. The Roadhouse we are currently exploring was built in 1881 as the main maintenance depot for the section of the railroad. This was built as the hub to link many of the towns west deeper into the Rockies, going through a major mining boom for the time. There were a few major railroad companies fighting over these areas to have access, transporting all of this material being pulled from these mountains. We can dive deeper into this in another video. This rail line was built and operated by a smaller company called South Park and Pacific Railroad for the start of its life. This little boomtown did not last super long. It was about 60 years-ish because in 1939, this train depot was shut down and left abandoned. Today, the restorations are chugging along at a steady pace, with a good amount of exterior and interior of the roundhouse complete and in use. It has once again become the main maintenance shed for the cars and steam engines on site. A focal point of these is Klondike Kate number 4, as the engine is now known, is currently having a full restoration and will become a focal point of the complex once finished. The name comes from its past, where it started its life in the Klondikes, hauling gold ore during the gold rush. Afterwards, it was moved around for various other purposes through the decades, which has led to the locomotive's current location here at the historic Como Depot. Just outside the roundhouse is an operational turntable. This allows the operators to pull any rail cars, engines, or equipment off the mainline tracks into the garages behind us. What an awesome but simple piece of engineering here. The views from this area are just breathtaking. It is easy to just get lost in it all. But let's continue north towards the original train station and hotel. On our way up, we need to take a pit stop at a group of volunteers rebuilding some of the track on one of the switches. Hopefully soon, these tracks will be in use once again. Our next little stopping point is Como's train station, which has had its restoration just about fully complete. Let's head inside and check in on the ground.
As you can see, we are inside the station, and this is really cool. It's really cool just being out here. It's like you're in the absolute middle of like nowhere. It's so cool, and we got a pretty nasty storm out yonder, so the wind is howling right now, but here we are. And so far, this is so cool. It feels like I'm just walking through a ghost town, and overall I'm pretty stoked. This is really neat, just seeing like an active current project being restored and seeing that side, not everything pretty and nice and good to go, seeing kind of like the work they have to put into it before it gets pretty and nice, and what it looked like before or as it's kind of getting there. And there's tons of artifacts in here. This is actually really neat. So I'm just going to do a quick tour of it. I'm going to let the narration take back over. It's windy today, so alrighty. Let's keep on going on this historic adventure.
Today, the old station is acting as a small museum, showing off some of the artifacts found on and around the property, including books, blueprints, and some of the buildings, and a lot more. This building is well worth the walkthrough. That's plenty of this train station. Let's move on to the final and most recent acquisition to the property. The old hotel. It is in the very beginning stages of the complete restoration and rebuild of the building, with hopes of using it again so people can come and stay within these historic grounds. The hotel switched between hands numerous times for varied uses, with its last predominant use being a restaurant and hotel for an extended period of time until it was sold in 2008. I guess it is time to wrap this little historic day trip up. If you enjoyed these places and video, please go and visit all of them, or just at least just one, to check them out yourself. It is so cool to just explore, learn, and feel the history. This was a lot of fun and one of my favorite travel style trips this year. If you're
Today, we will be exploring just a strike on a 200-acre claim within the Colorado Gold Rush history, also known as the Pikes Peak Gold Rush. But weirdly enough, most of this happens north of Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak was just used as a symbol for travelers when they had arrived to like the Denver area before they went deeper into the mountains to strike it rich. Before we explore the history of this sleepy little ghost mine town of Silver Plume, which is where we are sitting right now, let's see how it all started. And generally today, this introduction to the history of Colorado gold mining is going to take us through Silver Plume, Golden, weirdly Dinosaur Ridge, and the fork of Platte and Clear Creek that meet just north of Denver. Let's go see where this all started, the origins of this cool historic oddity over at the South Platte River and Clear Creek Fork. Welcome to the first stop of our history journey, just north of Denver, Colorado. I'm currently standing right in front of Highway 76. From here, 76 will take you up to Brighton and Fort Morgan, Colorado, northeast of here. And the other major interstate intersecting at this point is Highway 25. This is the main artery that runs north to south of the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains, spanning from Las Cruces, Mexico, all the way up to Buffalo, Wyoming. Now, you may be wondering, why in the world am I just standing at this random highway junction? Well, this is where the story begins, at a very different junction right behind me. And you may be wondering, why is this spot so important? Well, let's go for a little more of a walk and go to these little creek banks behind me. As the Jefferson Territory was slowly taking shape, with new faces slowly settling in throughout the area, it would witness a bit of a growth spurt in the late 1850s because of what some prospectors may have found in these very banks right behind me. We are currently standing where the South Platte River and Clear Creek meet, just right there. Hiding within these banks of freshly eroded mountains, cliffs, and valleys was hiding trace amounts of gold. Throughout 1858, small parties who stopped here began slight little rumors floating about, slowly spreading throughout the nation that there could be gold in these waters. As the population slowly grew, so did the curiosity of these mystic Rocky Mountains, attracting more and more people to see if they can be the first to strike it rich. But in 1859, everything changed, and why we're at this very spot. That's because the water flowing right behind me in Clear Creek will be the key to unlocking a chest of gold in the Rockies. So let's slowly prospect our way up Clear Creek, looking for a man named George Jackson, found in what today is known as Idaho Springs. We stand here in a once booming gold mining town, sitting on one of the largest gold deposits in Colorado. Between Idaho Springs and the neighboring town on the other side of this mountain, to our side, going up this street here, that is actually Black Hawk. Between those two, billions and billions of today's dollars worth of gold were extracted from this area. One of the more famous mining structures close to downtown here, Idaho Springs, is just a quick walk away east from our location. So let's head on over. Is the Argo Mill, this big old red building that's taken up the side of this mountain. This has become an integral piece of the mining district, providing milling services to the surrounding mines, and is probably most famous for the Argo Tunnel. It's a little over 4-mile long tunnel blasted right through the middle of this mountain, providing drainage, ventilation, and transportation services for the mines utilizing this rich gold vein underneath all this rock. This 4-mile long tunnel went completely through the mountain to Black Hawk and provided these services for the mines over there as well. Then this mill became one of the largest gold mills in Colorado. It's amazing that the gold deposits in this area were so rich that this town needed to build its own processing mill before even sending the ore out. That is wild. Just think about the amount of material pulled out of this mountain behind us. But hold on, wait a second. I think we may have skipped ahead a little bit. Ah, right, we got a little sidetracked. Okay, it is time to see where all of this began and find Mr. Jackson. And luckily, I know just the place. He's just a quick walk on the other side of town. Come on, let's head over. This water is freezing. Okay, so here we are, well over 100 years ago, in this exact spot where Chicago Creek that I'm standing in drains right behind me into Clear Creek. This is where the Colorado Gold Rush started. George Jackson was panning for gold in this very spot in January of 1859. And what he found in his pan eventually leading to the massive amounts of gold found right here in Idaho Springs. And with that, the gold fever would completely take over this territory, which will soon become the state of Colorado. Word quickly spread throughout the nation, and just shortly after this event, masses would descend here, looking to strike it rich from an unsteady economy at the time. With people pouring in from all over the place, there was a need for all types of goods in a bustling industry like these massive steam engines behind me that will soon become a revolutionary way to move people and goods across the United States. Just 10 years later, in 1869, with the construction finished on a transcontinental railroad, would be the start to this revolution. And not soon after that, trains would be hauling hundreds of tons of ore out of this very town.
Many towns were popping up overnight, with everyone scrambling to find their claim. With all of these people looking to mine, there would also need to be supplies. A trading hub would quickly pop up overnight, acting as a gateway into the untamed Rockies.
Golden City, Colorado, or just Golden today, was established in 1859, uncoincidentally the start of the gold rush. As you can see right behind me, it has grown into much more than just a couple farms and a couple little trading hubs to go out to the mountains. Today, it is a beautiful small town nestled between the Front Range of the Rockies and the Table Mountains, which we are standing on right now.
Overlooking a once mighty hub for trade and industry, at one point having a legitimate chance of becoming the brand new state of Colorado's capital in 1876. Below this grand overlook are the legacies of that time. The massive Coors Brewery plant, established in 1873, still operating here today, but much larger than its humble beginnings.
So let's get off of this mountain and head down in to explore Golden. So before we go right to downtown Golden, we're just going to make a little pit stop in this historic district, basically a block from downtown. And if you guess the name of this, you'll probably get it. It's called the Golden Historic Park, which, as you can see behind me, is an old Pioneer wagon. These things are really cool. Just imagine going from the East Coast to here in one of these little wooden wagons. I tell you what, I'd be so freaking sore, man. That would be a rough ride. But most of this wouldn't exist without some of those first people roughing it out in these wooden wagons. So to honor Golden's humble beginnings, let's take a little quick sidestep before going downtown and explore what they have to offer. So behind me is the Reynolds cabin. And I just wanted to take a little pit stop at this one because this is the oldest structure for this little historic site. This was built in 1873 at Pierce Ranch, which slowly grew into a ranch well over 1,000 acres. All right, let's go check out some more.
Much of what is shown in this park is from the Pierce Ranch, located in Golden Gate Canyon. This historic park opened up in 1999, so it's not the oldest museum in the world, but it's been here for a little bit. Luckily, they do offer guided tours for this site if you're looking for a more in-depth venture through, including a root cellar, a couple cabins, the old barn with some chickens and bees, depending on the time when you are here, if they are on location, and quite a bit more to explore in this little area. Most of the buildings housed on this site are well over 100 years old, so it's really cool to take a walk through history here, giving you a glimpse into what it was like living during this rapidly transforming and evolving time for a new bustling state trying to find its way to a hopefully brighter and unknown future.
All right, there you have it. Now that we've seen some of its past, let's go walk over to downtown and see its present. This is today's Golden. Behind me is the famous Welcome to Golden Arch, taking you into a lively downtown full of restaurants and shops, which has become more of a tourist destination, far from its trade-induced past. This bustling golden city welcomed not just miners but scholars as well. All of this new development and industry, along with the quickly growing population, also grew the need for higher education. And so, the School of Mines quickly became a reality, with the founder Bishop George M. Randall understanding the educational vacuum that was occurring right here in Golden. The school first kind of started out in 1870 as a private school with some of the original faculty on staff, including George Randall, Edward Berthoud, George West, and our good friend Arthur Lakes. Now, you'll want to remember that name for later. So over the years, the school will go through a few changes, and eventually in 1876, once Colorado has officially become a state, that this school is officially established as the Colorado School of Mines. This school quickly masses an impressive mineral and fossil collection whom Arthur Lakes and a few other colleagues amassed during their time here. Let's head inside to check it out.
So Arthur was quickly appointed professor of geology in 1880 due to his knowledge, discoveries, and passion for the subject. This vast collection of minerals and fossils led to the creation of this museum that continues to grow today. The Colorado School of Mines Geology Museum houses one of the best mineral and fossil collections in the state. This well-kept palace of geology is well worth a tour, or multiple tours, because they are only able to show a few thousand of the over 40,000 unique pieces housed here. So they do switch pieces out from time to time. The museum starts off with a fantastic display area showcasing many of the diverse minerals found in this state, breaking it down county by county and even per mine, which is where many of these were more or less accidentally discovered while looking for other precious minerals. With most of the diverse collection having been found in the Colorado Mineral Belt, which is a geological area cutting right through the state, containing much of the high-value minerals, gems, and fossils that sparked the very gold rush we are talking about today. The school has done a great job of beautifully displaying and breaking down each and every piece housed behind the bright glass showcases. Once you have your fill of the top floor, it is time to curiously venture down the steps to see what is housed below, where we will be able to see minerals from all over the world, including Europe, Africa, and other regions of the globe. This room continues into a small mine shaft detailing how minerals used to be extracted out of these very mountains, with a special little room to see inside. There is more to explore here, and possibly some minerals not from this planet to see here as well, but that can be saved for your visit, so we can continue on our history journey.
As the Front Range continued to expand and grow, so did the mining communities deeper into the mountains, bringing us here to Silver Plume, about a 40-minute, well, depending on the season really, about a 40-minute drive from Golden today. And back during that time, it was a significantly longer journey until trains were implemented. Within this gold rush, silver was also discovered, but it wasn't really utilized right away because gold was just worth more at the time. So the mining in this area didn't really super get kicked off until almost like the 1870s. Since there was gold here, but not in the quantities as other places, like right down the highway here in Idaho Springs. But little did they know in the 1860s, when the silver was first discovered, that this place was full of it, and it was great high-grade silver. So eventually when the value went up, people would start flooding in and start a mini silver rush within this gold rush. At its peak, this town had a little over 2,000 residents scurrying about and participating in the community. Just about the same time as Golden, and really the state in general, was really starting to find its stride in this new population boom. But as you can see today, this town more resembles a ghost town than compared to what it was in its heyday. But fortunately, along with its sister town down in the valley below called Georgetown, this general district has become a National Historic District. There has been a great deal of preservation along most of the buildings here and in Georgetown. I mean, look around here. This whole place is just full of old historic buildings. Honestly, I love just coming to this town because it just feels like you just kind of walk back in time a little bit. So right up this hill behind me, right in the center of downtown, as you can see by this little crossroads, takes you right up to a trailhead that'll snake through a lot of the old mining infrastructure here. So let's head on up to the same trails the miners used over 100 years ago to go extract some more and hopefully fill their pockets full of silver. Now, during the same time miners were hauling their way up to extract ore on the mountainside of Silver Plume, our friend Arthur Lakes was climbing the Table Mountains of Golden, Colorado, which is where we're at right now, in search of minerals and fossils of his own. One day, hiking with students on this very South Table Mountain, and very well could be in this same area, he made a great discovery that wasn't truly known until the year 2000, because they came across a large fossilized tooth that they thought was a part of a whole different animal. But then somebody stirred it up almost 100 years later, reanalyzed it, and figured out this was the first recorded Tyrannosaurus Rex fossil ever found. Due to all these findings, he regularly searched throughout this area, slowly working south, that way towards Hogback Mountain. And these discoveries would lead to the foundation of a whole new geologic era. Oh, so come on, let's head down south and see what he discovered. We have just made it up to the top of our first set of the multitudes of mining ruins throughout this mountainside. Here, take a look around. We have like an old work shed. We even still have, what's awesome at this one, I think specifically, is you still have the remnants of some of the minecart tracks heading right into the tunnel, which is really cool that some of this infrastructure is still hanging out here well over 100 years later. After sitting and rotting out in this harsh environment for so long, it's impressive. There's really this much left that's this intact yet. But a lot of what's left of the mines is just scattered all over the place because of this kind of harsh environment. Yet luckily this first stop still has a good amount left to it. You can see these railroad tracks that go to nowhere. Looks like another old operating shed. You have this miner shed as well, but what's really cool is we'll just take a quick look inside. And what's awesome is look at this old massive engine. So I am not sure what this was used for in the past. My best guess is this was most likely used as a large water pump to keep all the water drainage out of these mines. Because if you take a look to my left here, you have all this piping that goes in this reservoir tank, and this pipe goes straight into this engine. So like I said before, my best guess is this was a huge water pump to make sure the miners stayed safe and dry. And something really cool with this engine is that it even still has like the original belts attached to it with this huge generator housed in the back. Just imagine how much power they needed to keep the water from flooding these miners out. And what's even cooler is to my left here is what I assume is most likely either a tool shed or a dynamite shed. And the reason why I think this is, look how reinforced all these doors are. It's like double thick. And this thing is really cool to check out inside. And just think about it, over 100 years ago, there were people scattered all out right here, deep in the mines, blasting away, getting all kinds of crusty, dirty, risking their lives for some silver ore. Fortunately today, all of the mine entrances have been closed along this mountainside. Really, it's just for safety reasons. I mean, once these get so old, they're not being maintained, collapses happen. I mean, they just don't want people to die in here just mindlessly exploring. There are plenty of mine tours scattered throughout the area if you want to actually go explore and learn about the inner workings of the mine. It's really cool to just think about probably under our feet right now and throughout all of these mountainsides are just miles and miles and miles of left abandoned tunnels. Most likely, much of these are maybe flooded out at this point. And just imagine the hundreds of thousands of tons of ore that will run along these very tracks. One shovelful or one minecart at a time that leads you right out to this little cliffside that gives you a beautiful view of Silver Plume. So here you are. So let's continue on down, or I should say up, the 730 mining trail, also known as the Griffin Monument Trail.
This specific mine earned its namesake of the 730 mine because many of the workers here would start at 7:30 a.m. in place of most of the lower mines starting at a significantly earlier time. This was due to the long venture all the way up to the top of this mountain to get up and work the ore out of this mountain. Owned by Hennegy Griffin, I think that's how you pronounce it, whose brother is buried at the end of this very trail, marked by an impressive monument overlooking the entire valley below that you can still hike up to today. It's a great way to experience what these miners had to climb up every day to get to work.
So billions and billions of dollars in today's money was extracted out of this very mountainside, then transported down, loaded up into train hoppers, and sent down the tracks of the Georgetown Loop, which I don't know if you've heard at all in some of these clips of Silver Plume. You'll hear a light train whistle blowing down through the valley, and you can actually still ride this train from Georgetown up to Silver Plume today. So this silver boom would last throughout the 1880s and the early 1890s, creating fortunes and unfortunately ending some as well. And overall, this is just a start to our historic venture between these two towns. Just like all these mines along this hill that are kind of slowly rotting away into the mountainside, so will our venture here in Silver Plume. And just as Silver Plume was reaching its height, the Bone Wars were about to begin. Our buddy Arthur Lakes continued his geological exploits along with some friends, working their way south along the hogback known as Dakota Ridge, right next to Morrison, Colorado. Little did he know, with one of these explorations, he would change geologic history in March of 1877. Let's go find out how. It's just another day for Mr. Lakes. Time to go out and add to the fossil collection, scavenging a rich fossil bed on the slope of this ridge where he finds what seems to be something much different than a tooth or a plant, but a big old dinosaur bone. Little did he know at the time, Arthur just discovered what is now known as the Morrison Formation, named after Morrison, Colorado, due to this being the home of his discovery, which Morrison is located just down there. In this valley, you have Red Rock Amphitheater right behind us, and right down there is Morrison, Colorado. This specific uplift of rock is from about 163 to about 145 million years ago, when dinosaurs roamed and dominated the planet, full of plants and animals like the Stegosaurus, Apatosaurus, I'm going to butcher some of these, Diplodocus, and Allosaurus. He would continue his work here and in Como, Colorado, eventually becoming a full-time professor in 1880 at the School of Mines. And with these discoveries, this land and out west would change forever. Let's go see how. This set off a chain reaction similar to the gold rush, but a bone rush, to find what else was hiding in the western mountains. Not just gold, but old dinosaur bones. More specifically, to find more examples of the Morrison Formation, which is what we're standing on and looking at behind me right now. This ridge is now known as Dinosaur Ridge, along with Dinosaur National Monument in Utah and Como Bluff in Wyoming, that are some of the best examples of what can be found in this formation today. And speaking of examples, right behind me is actually well over 100 million year old petrified seabed, or shoreline bed it should be, not really seabed. But if you're ever at the beach or even in a stream or creek that has like a sandier bottom and you feel those little ripples on the bottom, that is exactly what these are right behind us, just with a little age. So let's continue our way up these geologic milestones and continue this story. This discovery created a ruthless competition between two scientists named Edward Drinker Cope and Nathaniel, I think I said that right, Charles Marsh. The two had a feud brewing prior to Lake's discovery, but it didn't truly boil over until this event sent both on a path of self-destruction. Each one wanted to outmatch each other with the newest and best fossil finding, getting to the point of spying, sabotage, and attempted stealing. Cope published as much material as he possibly could to show he is a better scientist, while Marsh chose the political ladder and became the chief paleontologist of the U.S. Geological Survey, using the power to cut Cope's funding and later trying to steal all of his fossils as well. And this all came to a head when this became a public sensation called the Bone Wars in 1890, when Cope decided to publish news articles detailing Marsh's exploits and wrongdoings. Over the next few weeks of smear campaigns against each other within the papers, both had ruined each other's reputations completely. Both Cope and Marsh's insatiable lust to be the better scientist had led them both to financial ruin. Although their careers were built on spite, they definitely did leave their mark in this realm of study, discovering over 100 new species and most of their artifacts sitting in museums like the Smithsonian today. So let's fast forward to the time of 1937, when a new roadway over this very ridge is proposed to being built. This roadway will be called the Alameda Parkway, and right behind me is that very pathway. And during this process of blasting and removing tons of material to build this road up and over the Dakota Ridge, they discovered a lot more than what they were bargaining for. Now known today as the Dakota Group, which is what we've been using and sampling in this part of the story. So let me turn this around and give you a closer look at some of the coolest spots on this whole ridgeline. This is a massive wall of dinosaur footprints that was uncovered during this process. So today, it has become a national monument. And down below there is even a small museum you can check out that offers tours that takes you up and around this whole ridgeline and gives you a detailed history of this entire place. Well, that is how the Colorado Gold Rush leads to the expansion of Golden and the birth of a state founding the School of Mines, allowing a local professor to make one of the most important archaeological finds of his time, sparking the Bone War. So if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching. I had a blast researching this and planning this all out. It took a lot of time to throw this and plan this all together, so please leave a like and subscribe. So I'll see you on the next one. Welcome to another history venture. Today we are going to be in the great state of Wyoming, learning how westward expansion, Abraham Lincoln, Transcontinental Railroad, and this train depot that you're about to see all linked together in one cool historic story. Spending most of our time within the largest city in Wyoming, which is also its state capital. Now this small city is packed full of history to explore, and today we are going to steam right along into the importance the city has had and currently has in the lifeblood of transportation across the United States. Trains are single-handedly the most important part of the start of this place. So let's start off with how this little railroad oasis began. Come on, let's go find out. Before Cheyenne and its historical Capitol building sitting right behind us here, was even a whisper on the United States map. Chatter was brewing within the United States government to continue a great railroad awakening, taking over the east of the Mississippi earlier on in the 1830s, with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad becoming the first to take on this innovative new mode of transportation, quickly growing into many different railroad companies and lines, ranging all the way up to 9,000 miles of track up to this point. So the conversation to build a train route connecting the east and west of the United States began to be discussed not too many years after the start. But the real movement and consideration started with Asa Whitney in the 1840s, which got as far as an official proposal and route, but stalled out due to arguments over where the base hub of this historic railroad venture would lead from. As the population quickly grew out west, so did the steam pressure in the United States boiler within Congress to connect this expanding country that recently added large expanses of land for the Mexican-American, all the while experiencing the California Gold Rush in 1848, and a touch over 10 years later, the Pikes Peak Gold Rush as well. And if you want to see the intro to the Pikes Peak Gold Rush, I have a video on it. Go check out the channel for that as well. But the safety valve was yet to release due to the persistent debate of where the route should start and where the tracks next to us, right along here, that we're walking around throughout, should arrive west. Some progress was finally made in 1853 when Secretary of War Jefferson Davis was designated to survey multiple routes out west across these wide, open, and dangerous lands. Well, maybe not so dangerous as it once was, but at least wide open lands to find the best possible route west, which each of the original 4 groups, each having a different parallel to track along east to west in the United States. And eventually a 5th group would do a north to south option from California to Oregon as well, with each of the different parties coming to a similar conclusion that it is possible in a few different areas to accomplish this goal. Once this news came to light, unfortunately, fighting began again within Congress. But this time was about specifically where the line should go. Should it be more northern or more southern? And this was right before the Civil War, so tensions between the North and South weren't exactly too good. So the northern politicians wanted to stay north, and the southern politicians wanted to route south. And so the stalemate continued. And after years of fighting, in walks a man named Theodore D. Judah, the man with hopefully the plan. He has been working in the railroad industry for a while and became infatuated with this grand idea of the Transcontinental Railroad and wants to be the person to see it through, convincing a few investors, saying that there are untapped riches awaiting them in this project. With these investors including Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker, creating the Central Pacific Railroad. Through his connections and the start to the Civil War, Theodore Judah helped push this idea to Abraham Lincoln, who officially signed the Southern Pacific Railway Act in 1862, changing the United States rail history forever. This act would also create the Union Pacific Railroad, which was tasked to start on the eastern side of the line in Omaha, Nebraska. And so finally a hub was chosen, and this project has finally left from argument stage to building. Well, maybe not just yet, but we're close. And so the Central Pacific would take on the western side of this railway, starting in Sacramento, California. The start to conquering the West had begun. So let's see how. The real progress really didn't begin until the closing of the United States Civil War in 1865. That's just because really any and all resources available were probably being thrown at that war, so it really wasn't viable to go, hey, let's build a railroad across the United States while we have the entire country going at each other. With each railway making most of its money through the government by being paid per mile of track laid, a race was on. It was time for the leadership of each railroad company to start laying tracks and driving spikes. The Union Pacific and the owner, Thomas Durant, would quickly build their way through Nebraska, and one stop, weirdly enough, in the upper little corner of Colorado. The Union Pacific slowly found its way, marching into Cheyenne in 1867, bringing the hordes of people needed to support this monumental project with it, turning a small military camp planted by Greenville Dodge, who was tasked to survey this very area earlier on when those first surveys were meant to go out west to really see the best viable route for the railway to take on. And with this railway stopping through, this place turned into a town overnight, turning what we are standing on and where we're standing at right now into what it is today. Earlier on, this place was nicknamed the Magic City of the Plains, since it grew from over 400 residents to well over 4,000 in just a couple months. This city became a major milestone for the Union Pacific, and it decided to invest heavily into its growth, which led to this cool, grand train station right behind us here, still standing today, that was built in 1887, which today it does probably look a bit different than its beginnings, but I mean that just kind of goes with the course of a couple restorations and keeping the building this old going. So let's go head inside and see what it is today.
This old large train depot quickly became the focal point of the exploding city. At the time, regarded as one of the best stations in the States, it was made of sandstone blocks from Fort Collins, Colorado. The building was quickly built and became one of the great buildings along the Union Pacific lines. In 1922, a 114-foot addition was added to the station, becoming a dining hall. The station would go through minor changes and restorations through the decades to become what it is today, including a restaurant in the East Wing, a revamped central lobby which is housing a train layout and vendors for the depot days, with the western side of the building becoming a nice museum detailing about Cheyenne's deep-rooted train history and a more permanent train layout on the second floor. There are also offices rented out on the third floor that you can't really see or go to because, well, those are just general offices. The square in front of the museum was built along with some major restorations in the late 90s and early 2000s of the Depot Museum and this general part of town, creating a great downtown hub for locals and anyone to visit. I generally enjoy stopping by this area if I'm ever really in town. It's actually pretty nice. Let's head up to the second floor and explore a little more about Cheyenne.
Today, Cheyenne is a quiet city deeply rooted in its past, housing a little over 65,000 residents and home to the famous Frontier Days Rodeo, which attracts hundreds of thousands of visitors each year. It's also a great place to visit if you're a history buff, with a surprising number of museums housed in this city, including this very train museum we're standing in right now, the ICBM and Heritage Site, Frontier Days Museum, Wyoming State Museum, Cowgirls of the West, and a whole lot more. Now, you may be asking, what does all of this have to do with the largest operating steam engine today? Well, let's go figure that out. Just like Cheyenne, making sure to preserve its past, so does the still operating Union Pacific today, having kept to its word of staying invested in one of the crown jewels of the Transcontinental Railroad. It has done a great deal of investment with preserving the past and keeping coal-fed and, well, now oil-fed steaming iron giants alive and operational. Let's head inside and get hands-on with history. There are two crown jewels housed within these walls, the world-famous Big Boy and the Living Legend. The shop has become their home, where all of the major maintenance and repairs and even restorations are performed on the Union Pacific's historic fleet. This shop is full of machinery, just like all of the machinery right behind us here, that are needed to be able to make any and all parts needed for these engines. Since parts are simply just not really made anymore, most of the time when something needs to be replaced, it will have to be custom fabricated in these shops. To save the best for last, let's go check out the living legend first. Come on. Alright, so this specific engine right behind us here is number 844, and it's pretty special to the Union Pacific. It sadly marks the very last steam engine to be bought by the company, with models ranging from 1937 all the way up to 1944, being able to reach speeds all the way up to and over 100 miles an hour, giving them some unique shrouds up in the front here to help keep the smoke from going way too low into the engineers' faces while they're zooming down the tracks. It eventually would go into just freight hauling, getting replaced by diesel engines and finally becoming a special service train in 1960, where it tours the country operating in special passenger runs and attends special events. This specific train sources heat through burning oil and not coal. As you can see right behind us, this tender looks like a big tank because it's full of oil. So generally speaking, many later steam engines ran on oil due to it being less labor intensive than coal and just generally more efficient. And in some areas like here in the United States, oil was just more available than coal. This monster is a little over 900,000 pounds, 114 feet long, and runs a wheel configuration of 484, which means it has 4 leading wheels, 8 of these massive 80-inch drive wheels, and 4 trailing wheels. So let's tour the rest of the shop and take a look at one of the last all-time greats left running and still powering down these tracks today. Welcome to Train 4014, also known as the Big Boy, produced by the American Locomotive Company for the Union Pacific, with only 25 ever built and just 1 still operating today. And it may or may not be this one right behind us. Luckily, of the 25 built, quite a few can still be found at museums throughout the United States, including St. Louis, Missouri, Dallas, Texas, Omaha, Nebraska, Green Bay, Wisconsin, and Denver, Colorado. And Scranton's 4012 that we're standing right next to. This actually just had a big restoration project as well. This is not running like the one in Cheyenne, but it's cool. Definitely doing a township right here right now, and we're passing by, so I thought I'd add this in. And this one is just cool and pretty and completely kind of restored and repainted to be sitting out here for people to enjoy. Let's get back to Cheyenne. So let's dive into this rolling piece of history. Come on, let's go around the other side. They are a whopping 132 feet long with a wheel configuration of 4884, meaning it has double the drive wheels as the living legend that we had just looked at. Because this engine is so long, it needed some special modifications, to the point that the 4 pilot wheels in the front here right behind us, these guys right here, and then there's another set back here behind this big piston right there. This front section of the train actually was sitting on a pivot, so whenever it would come around the corner, the front end would kind of pivot before the rest of the train. So if you ever see videos of it going around a corner and it kind of looks a little different, a little crooked, it's built to be that way. This train isn't just long, it is very heavy too, weighing in at 1.2 million pounds. Now just imagine how much power it took just to get this moving on the tracks, let alone all the cars that's pulling behind it. So let's go to the tender to see where all this fuel is coming from. These were originally coal-fired engines, but it was converted to an oil-burning engine during its restoration, with the massive tender full of oil right behind us here that acts as its main fuel while it's going down the tracks today. And you may be asking, how in the world does all this fuel get transferred into steam? So let's go back to the front of the engine and I'll show you how. And with that massive tender full of oil to burn, the heat must go somewhere. And that somewhere is transferred into water through a process called conduction and convection. In short terms, the oil in this case is burned, creating heat within the firebox, with a clever system built to move all that hot air out of the box in the back of the train to move it to the front through a bunch of tubes going through all the center of this thing. And once it reaches the end, it'll pop out the smokestack in the front, giving the steam engines that iconic plume of smoke coming out the front. So this heating system is completely surrounded by a 25,000 gallon tank of water, pulling in most of that heat from the firebox to boil that water up and create steam. So this closely resembles, well, almost like a similar way of like how your car radiator would dissipate heat by forcing air through that hot water, cooling the water, taking it back to the engine. Overall, it's like a closed loop system. But this is basically using that backwards to take that energy, using the water to propel the train forward. And you may be asking, how do they take this steam and transfer it to these pistons, propelling this massive machine down the tracks? Let's see how. So when water becomes steam, it expands and takes up more space, creating pressure within this boiler. This is a process called thermal expansion, which means when something is warmer, the molecules will move faster and faster and faster, making it need more space. With all these fast-moving molecules being forced in a confined space and nowhere to go, you get pressure. In this case, with this train, up to 300 psi of pressure, which is a ton. If this boiler were to ever fail, most of Cheyenne would probably know. This is all held in check with hundreds of stay bolts. This camera is struggling probably to pick them up, but I don't know if you can see all these little rivets and all these little bolts back in here are making sure everything is staying tight and in place while all of this heat and pressure is building up within the engine. There are some safety measures as well if in case anything would fail, like a couple little blow-off valves to mitigate a catastrophic disaster. All of this steam must be used for something. Well, it is released down into giant pistons that are right in front of us here, housed right in front of these massive drive wheels, utilizing the massive amount of pressure to push them forward, spinning the wheels and making the train move. And so basically, these huge rods in front of us are pushed back and forth with this massive piston here. Each chug you hear is pressure being pushed into here, forcing the piston out, pushing all of these rods down, forcing this wheel down, around, and back, pushing this train forward. These engines would service the Union Pacific rails all the way up until the early 1960s, when they were unfortunately retired. This specific engine was built in 1941 and traveled well over 1 million miles in its service history. This mighty train eased into Rail Giants Train Museum in Pomona, California in 1961 to take the 52-year-old long nap until coming back here to Cheyenne in 2013 to be revived and brought back to life, and once again roar down these tracks. In 2019, it did just that, to become a roaring piece of history again. It is so cool what some heat and water can accomplish when thrown into a 1 million pound machine to help transport goods across the country, helping to connect and build an upcoming and industrialized world. Well, that's the end of our history journey today, seeing how westward expansion, Abraham Lincoln, the Transcontinental Railroad, and this steam depot we're standing in right now all relates to the largest currently operating steam engine in the world. Thank you very much for watching. If you want more, leave a like down below and subscribe, and let me know of any possible topics you would like to explore next. The larger the channel grows, the bigger the ventures and topics we can cover. And so with that, I'll see you wherever history takes us. Okay, we are in the historic city of Baltimore, Maryland, going to explore and see just a cannon shot from an entire naval battle of the history that lies throughout the city and the Chesapeake Bay. That is right behind us. We are currently standing in Inner Harbor, right in downtown. Today we will see how the Revolutionary War, Fort McHenry, War of 1812, and United States National Anthem, also known as the Star-Spangled Banner, are all linked into one historic venture. Let's get started with the Revolutionary War. The year is 1763, and the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, has just concluded, guaranteeing all French land east of the Mississippi to be a part of the current British colonies. Due to the expenses of a long war far from the mainland of Britain and the need of constant military presence throughout the colonies, expenses were growing. This was done through a series of increasing taxes and cost-cutting measures like the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Quartering Act, and a whole lot others. With each set of new taxes and laws being released, just increased the amount of black powder ready to blast through the colonies and start a revolution. By 1770, the country was just a few more grains away from filling a powder keg full of black powder and received a crate full with the Boston Massacre taking place, setting the newspapers ablaze throughout the colonies, becoming a major stepping stone in helping the colonies start working together. Just 2 years later, in 1772, creating the Committees of Correspondence. This was done to try and use the weight of all the colonies together and try to influence the British to lessen all of these new laws. The following year, a Tea Act was enacted, followed up with the Boston Tea Party. By 1775, the lit wick had burnt to the black powder, and the Revolutionary War would commence. The British would use their overpowering navy to blockade all of the soon-to-be United States ports, including the entirety of the Chesapeake Bay. And a fort was hastily built looking over the entrance of the harbor, which is right behind us. So this area was chosen to be the perfect location to defend it. The primitive defensive structure was just built out of earthen embankments, more or less, known as Fort Whetstone. As you can see, right behind us here, this is more or less what the fort originally had looked like. We are currently on the outskirts of Fort McHenry, looking at more or less what it originally would have looked like during the Revolutionary War. This fort would stay occupied and ready for an attack that would never come. And by 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, ending the American Revolution, banding the colonies together and forming a new nation. So let's head deeper into the fort and explore deeper into this cool, historic venture. The fort would see some significant renovations starting in 1798, turning the earthen fort that we were just looking at into what's right behind us. Significant upgrades, with a lot of the interior of the fort being built out of brick and stones, so it was able to house and store modern weaponry and even take hits from it as well. This imposing star-shaped fort would go through a name change while the renovations were happening. Now named Fort McHenry after George Washington's Secretary of War. The renovations were finalized by 1803 and would become the home of one of the few artillery units in the new United States military. But this currently quiet fort would become the home of one of America's most famous battles during the War of 1812. And to understand why the War of 1812 started, we need to backtrack just a little bit to the year of 1789, all the way over in France. The French public grew increasingly tired of the increasingly oppressive monarchy, with food shortages, higher taxes, and a whole lot more going on within the government and throughout the country. With a massive crowd of people storming the Bastille in July of 1789, signifying a major turning point in the French Revolution. By 1793, the monarchy was outright more or less abolished, and the country was run by a national convention. During this time, many European monarchs were frightful of this power change, looking to outright suppress it so this doesn't spread throughout Europe. European powers like Britain, Prussia, and Austria took arms against France, and the French Revolutionary Wars had begun. With these wars lasting all the way up until 1799, ending in a momentary peace, and unfortunately sparking back up more or less later that year, and lasting all the way up until 1815, called the Neapolitan Wars. This was when Napoleon had more or less taken over France and started his conquests across Europe. Now, so you might be asking yourself, what in the world does all this have to do with the newly formed United States? Let's go see how. The The United States wanted to stay neutral in the European conflicts during these wars because it didn't have anything to do with them really. This remained true through the first set of wars until Napoleon seized power in France during 1799. The short peace between France and Britain would end by 1803, but become a very different war that would be hard to stay neutral in. Not only were major naval and ground battles occurring in and around France, so were major economic wars between the two powers, leading to the British openly seizing American trade vessels and sailors to incorporate them within their fleet. This led the US to basically be forced into a trade war at first with Britain to try and stop the abuse of power. But all this did was drag both countries closer to war. With each month passing and tensions slowly rising, someone was going to need to budge and put ink to parchment for an official war declaration. The first strike was the United States, with a declaration of war passing in June of 1812 and Britain quickly following up. The War of 1812 has now begun.
The British well outclassed the American Navy with over 500 ships, compared to the United States only housing 16 at the time. Quickly realizing a naval war would end in a swift loss, the United States wanted to play a ground war, forcing the British into land skirmishes, giving US troops a home field advantage, with the initial ground plan to attack up into Canada to capture land for leverage when negotiating peace once the war was over. This quickly stalled out due to the high numbers of native tribes supplied by the British to help defend their land, creating a stalemate in the region. Much of the war was back and forth for the first couple years until 1814, when Napoleon was defeated in Europe, allowing Britain to send much of its military over to the United States to try and end this war once and for all. To try and destroy the American morale, they set their sight on Washington, D.C. and some of the surrounding cities to bring pressure off of the Great Lakes region, landing troops in Maryland far from D.C., quickly moving in and crushing American resistance in the city. The military set fire to most of the government buildings within the city and quickly left to take Baltimore, which is one of the most important ports in the region. Let's head over to Fort McHenry and see how this went.
And here we are, the pinnacle of today's historic venture, Fort McHenry, at the mouth of the Baltimore Harbor, currently acting as a national monument and that anyone can visit and explore its historic battle-torn grounds today. After DC had been sacked in August of 1814, the British were closing in on Baltimore, where the American defending forces were scrambling to construct defenses around the city. The first battle would take place around the outskirts of the Battle of North Point, designed to slow down the advance and buy Baltimore just a little bit more time to prepare. This plan went perfectly. Even though the British forces won, the American forces did their job by inflicting many casualties, forcing them to slow down. By the time the British Army arrived, it was too late, due to the American forces building a considerable defensive line along the city, with a large defending force of almost 10,000 infantry and about 100 artillery. Realizing charging into these defenses at Hampstead Hill would most likely end in a catastrophic loss for the British Army, the commander decided they would need artillery support from the Navy stationed just outside of the harbor, right down this way, down that way, just outside a distance, to come on up. But to do this, they would need to break past Fort McHenry, which is where we're standing at right now. The last line of defense for the city of Baltimore would need to hold out against the might of the British Navy. The Battle of Baltimore is officially on in September of 1814. Just behind us, the mouth of Inner Harbor, merchant ships were purposely sunk to slow down the British Navy's advance near this fort to help make sure it was at its most effective in the battle. An attack plan by the British was laid out to blow the enemy out of Fort McHenry, using everything the ships could throw at them, and pummel the 1,000 men to rubble or to surrender. The troops within the fort, commanded by George Armstead, had a very different plan. The British sent in their mortars and newly developed rocket ships in to pound the fort starting September 13th. And now something really cool with the design of this fort, it was built to take hits from these mortars and cannon fire. Right in this room that we're standing in has a few feet of concrete, a brick layer, and over 10 feet of earth. This was built to protect the stores of gunpowder to fire off the cannons. And if you look around here, all of these entrances on our right and on our left here are curved in when it comes down. These were purposely built this way so that if any shells were to go off exploding, no shrapnel would be able to come down and hit the stores below, creating a massive explosion. But because of how this was built, that couldn't happen. The British sent in their mortar and newly developed rocket ships in to pound the fort starting September 13th. Some of the other ships sat back and watched the show, including one housing a lawyer named Francis Scott Key, negotiating a prisoner release from the British. Now, something awesome with this fort is that they still have a lot of the original cannons and equipment throughout this area. Just being here and seeing just the absolute size of these cannons, I can imagine these things shooting off, like the concussion that would come off. It would probably, you just feel it in your chest. It's so cool. And most of these cannons on the fort had a little over a mile range outside of here. So a lot of the British ships would sit just outside of the range once the battle kind of started, which for both sides was very limiting. A lot of the British warships with the heavier cannons couldn't get close enough to hit here because that would be in range of these cannons. So that's why they used mainly rocket and mortar ships to try and outrange them. And also there's only very specific points in this harbor those ships could go through. And the main deep channel those ships would go through would take you right here next to the fort, which would basically spell disaster for those British ships. With how heavily built this fort was, it was built to take on the largest and biggest cannons of the time. And those little mortars and rockets didn't really do almost anything to these walls while they were going off. For over 24 hours, the onslaught of rockets, red glare, and bombs bursting in air constantly pounded the grounds of Fort McHenry. With all the occupants could do was wait out the attack and prepare for the worst, since the ship sat just outside the cannon's range. As day became night and night became day, no soul budged. The defenders held firm. It was either lose Baltimore or save it. Thousands of shells and rockets were launched at the fort. Quite a few missing just because of the range that the ships were forced to fire from. And throughout the night, the weather was not really ideal for this kind of battle. Cold temperatures and a lot of rain would hamper any amphibious landing from happening with the cover of this artillery. As the morning sun warmed the battered grounds, the cannons halted to see if the fort was still operating. As the smoke and fog slowly dissipated, a massive American flag was raised to show they were still there, placing the battered, war-torn one from the bombardment of the night before. Fort McHenry had taken minimal damage due to all of the well-done, quick preparations and the other upgrades finished up a few years earlier. With how well the American forces held, the British pulled out from Baltimore to head south to Louisiana, where another major battle takes place that we can visit on another day, becoming a major morale boost to the Americans due to the loss of Washington and stalemate up north in the Great Lakes region. This win becomes a major turning point in the war and considerably helps bring both nations closer to peace. Once the battle ended, Francis Scott Key would create a poem called The Defense of Fort McHenry that would be renamed later on to the Star-Spangled Banner, being adopted as the United States national anthem in March of 1931. The War of 1812, also known as the Second War for Independence, due to its officially legitimizing the United States, showing it can take on a world power like Britain, gaining respect with many of the major powers of the time. The Treaty of Ghent was ratified by both countries, ending the war in early 1815, with some skirmishes like the Battle of New Orleans still occurring afterwards, since the message didn't really get out in time to those respective areas. Fort McHenry would go through upgrades over the years, being used in the Civil War and finally losing its constant garrison in 1912. It would later be used to help in both world wars as training grounds and a temporary hospital. Today, it sits as a reminder to the war that brought the United States to the world stage and created its most iconic song. So that's where we end today. I hope you enjoyed our history venture, exploring some new stories in a very different part of the country. We saw how the Revolutionary War, Fort McHenry, War of 1812, and the United States national anthem also known as the Star-Spangled Banner, are all linked into one historic venture. So, I'll see you on the next one. Welcome back to another history venture. Today, we will be exploring a pair of once booming mining towns known as the Silver Queen of Colorado, or the Silver Queen of the Rockies, and see why this beautiful little Rocky Mountain town and ghost town have been designated as the Georgetown Silver Plume National Historic Landmark District. With a stamp like that and the plethora of historic structures well preserved here all along this main street right behind us is just like one example of literally hundreds of examples in this little district. There are going to be books worth of stories hiding within every rickety plank, handful of mining debris, and puff of steam coming out of this small area. To do that, we need to go back to when this was just another forest-covered valley, full of resources to extract. That is why we need to travel a few miles down Clear Creek from here to Idaho Springs. To go over Georgetown, we need to know exactly why and how people were there to look for gold. So that brings us here to Idaho Springs. We are standing at the confluence of Chicago Creek right here and Clear Creek right on back there, where a monumentous event occurred for the current Kansas Territory. Well, also the Jefferson Territory, but that can be a whole nother story we can dive into another day. So traces of gold were found by prospectors in the Platte River while the Denver area was just beginning and really just kind of like a little trading area. It wasn't really much of anything. And this happened during the 1950s, slowly spreading word around that there might just be gold up in the mountains. Some early prospecting parties slowly worked their way into the Rockies, following the creeks and streams flowing through this rugged terrain. One of these hopeful souls worked their way up to Clear Creek, up through present-day Golden and into where we are at right now, the confluence of Chicago Creek and Clear Creek, and what is now known today as Idaho Springs. While panning at this very spot, George Jackson would make a territory-changing and, well, state-forming discovery. Within his pan wasn't just loose gravel and dirt, but gold was hiding within it. So in January of 1859, the Pikes Peak, or Colorado Gold Rush, kicked off, and hordes of new faces would begin to flood this part of the Rockies to hopefully make their own claim and strike it rich with all the hidden gold beneath their feet. So later that year, two brothers were taking the same path up Clear Creek. This very creek we are standing in right now, up further past Idaho Springs. Snaking through this beautiful area, the twisting and winding waters would lead them to the meeting of South Clear Creek and Clear Creek, way up in Georgetown. Let's head on up and see what they discovered. David and George Griffith were two brothers looking to get rich in the Rockies. Originally from Kentucky, fueled by a dream that they were about to fulfill right below their feet. They had discovered gold in this very area, quickly setting up shop to try and enjoy the fruits of this dangerous and risky venture. They quickly established a camp to begin mining operations named Georgetown. The following year is when everything really started to take shape for them. When the hordes of people from around the country started to rush into this part of the Rockies due to the quickly spreading news that the discovery of the rich gold deposits in this area were true. With those brothers following Clear Creek right behind us here, and just another 100 yards up, splits in half, where Clear Creek continues on up to the right, up to Loveland Pass, and then also clears off to the left and becomes South Clear Creek. Soon, this would be known as the Griffin Mining District. During this time, gold was the prize mineral everyone was looking for. So when they were mining here, the discovery of silver wasn't really a big deal, and they didn't really fully notice it until later on. Most of the silver was just simply discarded, but unbeknownst to the miners at the time, this would be the most important discovery for the mining district. To be able to have regular supplies for themselves, miners, and the mines themselves, the Griffith brothers built a road connecting Georgetown to Commerce City that included a toll. This was completed in 1860, increasing the ease of access to this area. But unfortunately, this little boom of gold would come to an end fairly quickly. The easily accessible gold deposits here were quickly depleted, and much of the gold here was in hard to process rock that really would balloon costs, making this not really a viable option to mine. By 1864, the gold boom was over for Georgetown, and it looked to become just another small boom town to become a ghost town in just a few short years. But this very year, that pesky silver was discovered to be in a much larger quantity than ever thought, and it was extremely high grade. By the following year, this gold town had completely flipped on its head and became a silver boom town, bringing in a new rush of prospectors, miners, and mines to the district. And in just a couple years, by 1867, Georgetown was booming exponentially more than ever before during that gold rush. The riches from mining and the beauty of the area brought in investors from all over the country, transforming Georgetown from a bunch of slapped together buildings, houses, and shops to a highly invested in mountain town, including the famous Paris Hotel, a dedicated fire hall which was unheard of for many mining communities like this, and even a pioneer in electricity, sprinkled with unique architecture throughout all the streets. Just like with the gold mining, they found it difficult to process the ore and make it profitable to mine in such a difficult conditions along the sides of these rugged mountains you see behind us. This forced the mills and the mines to come up with new, unique methods to overcome many of these issues. Due to the beauty and high amount of investment in the structures and in infrastructure to the area, Georgetown wasn't only a boom town, but a tourist town as well. And around this time, at the peak of the tourism, the peak of the silver boom, and the peak of investment, Georgetown received the name of the Silver Queen of the Rockies, or the Silver Queen of Colorado. But this name wouldn't last long. And not long after the height, in the late 1870s, Leadville would quickly steal this crown as one of the richest mining districts in the state, which did overshadow Georgetown, leading to a slight downturn in popularity in investment and tourism, and slight loss of workers as well, because some of the more experienced people could go over to Leadville and be paid more. This didn't completely ruin Georgetown though. The mining here was still extremely plentiful, and this area was still very prosperous after the fact. So Georgetown continued to chug along and stay an important piece of the mining communities in the Rockies during this time. But like all mining boom towns, there is normally a bust, and this was unfortunately right around the corner. It is 1893. And Georgetown has seen some slight and steady decline over the past decade, and would see a massive collapse in its mining industry from the repeal of a single act, the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890 to be more specific. This would ravage the silver mines throughout the state, and really the country, completely crashing the market, forcing a booming industry to completely collapse. This act had the United States government buying 4.5 million ounces of silver each month to contribute towards the Federal Reserve, where officials that wanted to move towards a bimetallism standard for the dollar, and not just the gold standard. Basically, the plan for the United States dollar was to have it backed by gold and silver. This was repealed in 1893 during the Great Panic, which was the worst depression to hit the United States until really the Great Depression. Massive runs on banks, major and small businesses alike shut down across the country, and a significant amount of uncertainty backing the United States dollar was raging in the country, with a recovery not seen until the late 1890s. This event would turn many boom mining towns into ghost towns, overnight. Georgetown and its sister town, Silver Plume, were no different. Both lost some of their luster and almost became just another cluster of scattered abandoned homes and buildings. The decline here wasn't as abrupt as many others due to the light tourism still trickling through and slight bump in mining activity during World War I. That's mainly what kept these two towns on life support. But the ravages of the decline were becoming ever more apparent as the years kept on ticking by. Fortunately, a turnaround in tourism occurred in Colorado, and one of the main arteries in and out of the Rockies was built right through this pass, I-70. This significantly increased the amount of people coming through to visit this amazing area. With Silver Plume and Georgetown containing hundreds of original buildings that were surprisingly well preserved from the mining boom, this region quickly became a National Historic District in 1966. This helped increase investment in the area and keep preservation efforts going, increasing tourism and even bringing people back to town, slowly increasing the population once again. Since there are literally hundreds of historic structures in the district, there are equally as many stories to tell. Obviously, we can't go over them all, or even really know them all. So let's travel through a couple of the more interesting finds in town and work our way into Silver Plume and explore some of the history as well. So let's head into this small hydroelectric plant sitting right behind us here, built in 1900, that was used to power not just this town, but the surrounding mines, Silver Plume, and even some of Idaho Springs. So let's go check it out and see its interesting story and why Georgetown has a pretty meaningful impact on the United States Western electricity expansion. Now, the original hydroelectric plant that was in Georgetown, built in 1886, utilized DC power. This was used for basically like simple utilities, like street lamps at the time. This may sound like, oh, why, whatever. I mean, it's just some street lamps. But no, at the time, this was some cutting edge, leading technology to be able to have consistent and reliable light through electricity other than using oil lamps or other sources. The idea of having a constant power source and distribution center to power utilities and homes has really only become viable for a couple of years, mainly using DC current, or also known as direct current. This style of electric distribution was pretty short-lived because a man named Nikola Tesla helped pioneer the way for alternating current, or AC current. Once again, Georgetown became an early adopter of this new technology, and in 1900, this very hydroelectric plant was built, completely changing this town and region. But at first, this plant wasn't just hydroelectricity. It was a coal plant at first, but a couple short years later, they had finished the reservoir and the piping to come down here to power hydroelectric generators. Transferring to AC current allows for a major advance in how electricity can be transported, allowing it to be sent outside of just the localized region of Georgetown, but allowing them to send this electricity all the way up to Silver Plume and a lot of the more remote mines around the area. Electricity was even sent all the way to Idaho Springs, which was only possible due to this new advanced AC power. Georgetown became one of the early prime examples on how to use this new technology and the impressive reach AC power had compared to DC, becoming a key example and blueprint on how to create and use electricity in the rugged and unforgiving Western Territory. The power is generated here by releasing water in a reservoir a few miles up Guanella Pass in a large 30-inch pipe where it cascades down into the valley, eventually into this station. This rushing water picks up speed as it flows towards the plant in pipes. Once the water reaches the plant, all that energy is built up, pushes these cups within the turbines, spinning the entire turbine. With the turbine spinning, the generator utilizes electromagnets to generate power within the generator. The power leaves this facility and is distributed throughout this community and even outside of it, wherever it can be used, whether that was Silver Plume or even eventually Idaho Springs. This specific plant was one of the oldest operational hydroelectric plants in the United States. But unfortunately, today it is sitting dormant. As you can see, the generators behind us are quietly waiting to be activated again. Just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Energy Museum is the Paris Hotel. This hotel is important to this town due to the large amount of original and old artifacts contained within its walls. The building was originally built in 1875 with a man named Louis Dupont, not exactly sure how to pronounce that, but would acquire it in the 1880s. He slowly added to it and customized the property through the 1890s into its current stature today, which is this large, beautiful museum, which at one point was an actual operating hotel. Along the way, amassing and preserving many artifacts of the time within the walls of the hotel. After his passing, different family members had taken control of it over the years, where it was eventually sold to the National Society of the Colonial Dames of America. That is a mouthful. Who have gone through a great deal of work to restore this historic building. It includes one of the best time capsules into what staying at a hotel in the mining boom era of the Western United States was like. So before leaving town, let's hit one final little spot. Before traveling up to the small sister town of Silver Plume, that away up the pass. So this is the original firehouse built in 1875 to protect Georgetown from any major fires which ravaged communities like this during this time. And that's really why a lot of ghost towns really don't exist anymore. Fires would just rip through them and wipe them out because most of the buildings were just made out of the trees and lumber in that valley. Georgetown had a volunteer fire service starting in 1870, which helped with the significant amount of preservation this area has seen. Many mining boom towns didn't have a dedicated fire service, so when a building would burn, there would be a good chance it would take a lot of other buildings with it, if not most of the town. Having a fire service helped save Georgetown from this happening and mitigated fire damage from getting way out of control. A few years after building this firehouse, they added a much larger tower on top in 1880. This had a few functions, working as a hose tower, lookout, and could house larger bells to warn the community of a fire. The town was very proud of their volunteer firefighters, and it became a position of great pride to become chief. The firehouse acted as a meeting hall as well, with the upstairs, the second floor here, still housing most of the original artifacts, and even the very carpet on the floor up there is original. So unfortunately, nobody's here right now, so we can't go inside. And something really cool that's unique about this place, there are specialized firefighter hats that were plated in silver. That just shows how plentiful silver was in this area. Can you imagine having a silver-plated firefighter hat? That is so cool. And one other little piece inside, along the walls in the main staircase, you can still find etches of people writing into the walls from the 1800s of some of the original firefighters from this town, which is so cool. Just walking in, literally seeing that history there. And really, that's probably one of the best ways to really truly know this place is original and has been here since that time. Okay, let's finish up the history of the Silver Queen of the Rockies by wrapping up in the ghost town of Silver Plume, just 2 miles up this canyon by car or by train. But which way should we take? Well, I think I have an idea. Silver Plume's history is just as deeply embedded into Georgetown's history, just as much as Georgetown's history is deeply embedded into Silver Plume's history. Basically, one really wouldn't exist without the other. More so, Silver Plume probably wouldn't exist without Georgetown, because really Silver Plume was more or less like an extension of Georgetown. Basically, more and more claims kept being found up the canyon and up the mountain slopes around the Georgetown area. Neither would exist if it wasn't for the great gold and silver boom started by the Griffiths. So let's backtrack just a little to the height of the silver boom in this area. There are thousands of people all around this canyon taking their part in this event. The construction of a narrow gauge rail line began in the late 1870s to connect the towns of this valley all the way up past, hopefully, Silver Plume. The construction of a narrow gauge rail line began in the late 1870s to connect the towns and offer a much easier way to travel and transport ore or goods between them, since it wasn't exactly easy to do so. Even though they are just 2 miles apart, Georgetown and Silver Plume have a 600-foot elevation difference, which isn't exactly the easiest terrain to transport tons of ore and supplies up and down between. Building a railroad up this pass was no easy feat. It would need to be an engineering marvel to even be possible. Really, the ultimate goal was for the rail line to pass through Silver Plume and continue on to eventually link into Leadville that had just began its silver boom. Engineers said a railway couldn't be built here because the average grade is at least or above 6%, which is way too extreme for the locomotives that they wanted operating in this canyon. Fortunately, the head engineer of Georgetown, Breckenridge, and Leadville Railway came up with a genius solution of creating a corkscrew type layout that would feature a breathtaking horseshoe bridge that stands at the height of 95 feet, allowing passengers a grand view of this area. And that may or may not be the bridge right behind us that we had just seen a train passing over, bringing the railway's grade to just 3%. This route quickly became a tourist destination, with it being advertised one of the most scenic railroad experiences in the country. This golden period of train travel for this area ended in 1938 due to the decline of the general industry in this area, the Great Depression, and automobiles really starting to grab hold of transportation around the United States. Luckily, this railway was just too integral to the history of Colorado. So let's head on up these tracks and take the train up to Silver Plume Station and see how this place was saved. So the idea of preserving and rebuilding this engineering marvel of the time began in 1959 when 100 acres of land along this very route was donated to get the train rolling back along these tracks of this historic route. At the start, the progress was pretty slow, but over time, efforts slowly grew into rebuilding this dream. The project received a significant boost once it became a part of the National Historic District of Silver Plume and Georgetown. By 1973, the restoration process began in Silver Plume right at this very spot. They started laying track up here because if they would have started at the lower end, they would have had to deal with the bridge right away, which they just didn't have funding for just yet. So they decided to work their way down to the bridge. And this was done by 1977. And at this point, they had already started running excursions up and down the available track. But the key piece that what made this rail line famous still needed to be built. This finally happened when they received a $1 million grant to fund this restoration. A replica of the bridge was completed in 1984, and the rail line was finally whole again, able to take visitors from Georgetown to Silver Plume along this impressive route. Over the years, the Historical Society has taken time to fully restore the rail shop and depot here in Silver Plume, allowing them to maintain the current rail fleet and restore some older cars as well. So if you're passing by, it is not a bad idea to even just take a little pit stop and check out the museum they have in the back and go check out the original old restored station. This is definitely a cool little jewel of railroad history hidden in the Rockies. We have arrived at the final leg of today's historic venture of exploring the Silver Queen of the Rockies, bringing us here to the functioning ghost town of Silver Plume, Colorado. Sitting at just over 9,100 feet above sea level, these gravel roads we're standing on right now are built on history, with the locals wanting to preserve its rich past, which you really can't escape from because these mountainsides basically have you literally surrounded by it, which are full of echoes of the past boom and bust mines scattering throughout all the cliff sides around us. Silver Plume had a late start compared to Georgetown, not really becoming a prominent fixture for this area until the late 1860s, when much of the mining had started to take place around the mountainsides here, with rich silver veins lying throughout the mountainsides here, bringing many workers up here and quickly establishing a small town. Unfortunately, they didn't see nearly the investment as Georgetown did, so the amenities and structures paled in comparison to Georgetown during this era. There was a pretty deep resentment of the population here that grew towards Georgetown because they felt most of the money was being pulled out of here and taken down the valley, which, I mean, really it was. Prime example of this was in the 1880s, a fire came through and ravaged the entire downtown section of Silver Plume, and they could do nothing about it. And if they just had a little bit more investment, similar to Georgetown, who had a dedicated fire company, that probably could have been preventable. Today, locals are trying to keep this town going by remodeling some of the original buildings and giving them a new life. Bread, right behind us here, is one of those buildings. Once the local bakery supplying the town with fresh baked bread and other goods has become a local hangout. Overall, the owners have done a great job with preserving this property, keeping it with its original character, but also repurposing it for another use. With the other two main businesses along this quiet ghost town, including the Plume Coffee Company and Silver Plume Provisions. All three are 1800s era buildings as well, and have done an equally great job at keeping their respective buildings intact and breathing new life back into this historic main street. Mining in this area wasn't just hard on the equipment and the logistics of moving everything around, but it was hard on the miners as well. There are hiking trails, well, the one we're on right now, leading up the side of these mountains that start pretty much right next to the downtown of Silver Plume. And these hiking trails are built on top of the old paths the miners used to use to trek up and down from the mines. So if you're here and you're feeling adventurous, definitely take the 730 mine trail all the way up to the top. To really be able to put yourself in their shoes and take the trek hundreds, well, if not thousands of people have taken just to get to work. And along this path, you will be able to see a rare glimpse of a lot of the original mining infrastructure laid out along the mountainside, including hundreds, if not millions of tons of waste piles. And behind us here, a large chute that would send material down the mountain, where millions of dollars in their money at that time, which in today's money is in the billions of dollars, of silver-rich ore was extracted. And this trail takes us up to the 730 mine, which is arguably one of the most famous mines here in Silver Plume. So let's keep on trekking up to the top and check out an interesting story about the monument at the end of this trail and how this specific mine gained its name. Our first stop at the top of this hike is the Clifford Griffin Monument. Now, not only does this monument bring you out to an awesome overlook of I-70 and Silver Plume, but it also marks the spot of a tragic tale. So there was a man named Clifford Griffin. He began his life across the pond in England and moved to the United States to start a new life when tragically his soon-to-be wife, a day before the wedding, had passed away. He eventually found himself here in Silver Plume, working alongside his brother, helping him run his silver mine here. Now, he was pretty well known throughout Silver Plume as being a pretty good boss and taking care of his employees, but generally kind of kept to himself. And so he kept to his secluded ways and built a cabin very close to the mine he managed, the 730 mine, way up top high on this mountain. Known for playing a violin that would echo throughout the valley below, a lot of the locals of Silver Plume in this mining district would come out and listen to the evening song. But on one infamous night, he came walking out of his cabin, just like any other evening, violin in hand, came out and played songs just like any other. And a lot of people in the valley below listened just like normal. But when the violin stopped, a loud crack echoed throughout, sounding eerily similar to a gunshot. People raced up the trails to see if he was okay, but no help could be given. They found him face down in a grave he had personally dug, leaving a note for them to find, saying to leave him where he lies to allow him to lay at rest. And so the miners did just that, but they didn't just leave any old grave marker. They left this large monument right here to commemorate him. George Griffin, son of Alfred Griffin, Esquire, of Grand Hall, Shropshire, England. Born July 2nd, 1847, died June 19th, 1887. In compliance of his own request, buried here in this spot. So that's the story of Clifford Griffin and the Clifford Griffin Monument. So let's get to the end of this Miners Trail and wrap up this historic venture. Well, here we are, the end of this miner's path and the entrance of the 730 mine. Now this mine is given this name because it opened an hour later than any of the other mines along this path due to the long climb just to get up here. Well, here we are, the end of this journey through Georgetown and Silver Plume, or also known as the Silver Queen of the Rockies. So I just want to say thank you for watching. These take a lot of time to research, to script write, and then to also find shooting locations and to shoot this. And generally, I have a lot of fun making these. I think it's awesome doing the research, learning about an area, and then going hands-on with the history. Like this rock right here came out of this mine shaft from miners that hiked up this daily to extract silver ore out of this rock well over 100 years ago. And just imagine all the stories that this material, this hole in the ground, has to tell. And I really hope you enjoyed these videos too. So please like and subscribe to the video. Leave a comment of any other stories you'd like me to cover or venture to, because the more this channel grows, the farther and bigger topics we can cover. So once again, thank you for watching and joining us on this history venture. All right, I will see you on the next one. And generally at this point, I will be making one of these every other video. So you'll get at least one of these each month, because these are just doing too good. This is just about as much as I can do for right now between life. So I'll see you on the next history venture. Welcome back to another history venture. Today, we have headed back east, just outside of Philly, to explore an important turning point in the United States Revolutionary War. Getting hands-on with history, going over how a pair of defeats in Brandywine and Germantown, an ill-supplied army winter camp, and a man named Baron von Steuben all linked together in today's historic venture. Now, before we get into the meat and potatoes of Valley Forge, we need to first understand why we are here and why it is such an important encampment. So let's jump on in and take ourselves through some of the more important events to form the United States. The year is 1763. The 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, has just concluded, moving all French land east of the Mississippi to be part of the current British colonies. Due to the expenses of a long war with the French, far from the mainland and a needed constant military presence within the colonies, Britain needed to recoup the losses and maintenance costs. This was done through a series of increasing taxes and cost-cutting measures like the Sugar Act, Stamp Act, Quartering Act, and many others. With each set of new taxes and laws released, just increased the friction between the people living in the colonies and upper-level government members running the colonies, and Britain really as a whole. By 1770, the country was just a few more actions away from all-out rebellion, and they received an eventful with the Boston Massacre taking place, setting the newspapers ablaze throughout the colonies, becoming a major stepping stone and helping the colonies start working together just 2 years later in 1772, creating the Committees of Correspondence. This was an attempt to unify the colonies and use their weight to try and reduce some of these new laws. But these were largely ignored by the British. And the following year, the Tea Act was enacted, followed up by the Boston Tea Party. All of this friction officially started a fire on April 19th, 1775. With tensions between colonists and British leadership at an all-time high, fears of an all-out uprising or revolution were feared to be almost inevitable at this point. In an attempt to suppress the Patriots, Massachusetts Governor Thomas Gage ordered the military to openly seek out and seize militia weapons and black powder stores throughout the colony. They had received word there was a large stash on a farm in Concord, Massachusetts, so they quickly moved to come up with a plan to take it out. While discussions were occurring on how to approach confiscating or destroying it, Patriot spies were able to receive this information not long before the British troops would set out. This head start was vital in the skirmishes to come. As the British were preparing their forces to march towards Concord, 2 men were hastily sent on horseback by the Patriots in different directions to spread the word they were coming and to round up as many militia members as possible to thwart the British raiding parties. With the most famous of the 2 riders being Paul Revere, scrambling throughout the countryside, setting warning signals along the way to spread the word as quickly as possible. Lexington would be the first to witness violence. A small ragtag group of militia attempted to stand in the way of the imposing British force. Roughly 70 men were trying to block hundreds, and this went about as well as you would think. After firing 1 volley towards the Patriots, they realized just how outmanned and outgunned they were, quickly retreating out of Lexington, leaving a few killed and mortally wounded behind. By the AM hours of April 19th, the British were marching into Concord. Unknowingly by them, a much more formidable militia force was building up on the other side of town, consisting of hundreds of men this time around, instead of just a measly 70. The British forces were split up into a few different detachments to find this stash hidden on a farm. Thinking the main force was moving in to raise the entire town, the militia army moved in to hopefully stop them. The British detachment moving into downtown Concord, seeing this large militia gathering move in, retreated to set up a defensive position against the Patriots right on their tail. The militia quickly moved to attack the British and moved in to fire their first volley, becoming the first major engagement of the Revolutionary War, which would later be known as the Shot Heard Round the World, forcing the British to retreat all the way back to Boston due to constant ambushes along the way. The Revolutionary War has now begun. Now, let's fast forward a couple years to September 11th, 1777. The British had set their eyes on Philadelphia in an attempt to not only take the city, but also demoralize the revolution by taking down the Continental Congress, which is within the city, making it the current capital. George Washington, the leader of the Continental Army, was tasked to repel the British forces in Brandywine. The battle was going well for the first few hours, with Washington's forces holding a strong defensive line along the Brandywine Creek. But this would quickly change with fog rolling into the area, allowing British forces to exploit the new cover to send a large force across the creek undetected. They then pounced on one of Washington's flanks, catching them by complete surprise, forcing Washington to send extra troops over to try and shore up the collapsing line. And at the same time, the British sent another large attack in a different location along Washington's line in an attempt to just generally overwhelm and try and collapse the entire front. And this would do just that, completely changing the tide of the battle. With most of his reserves engaged in the flanking force, he couldn't do anything about the second line collapsing. Washington, understanding it's better to preserve as many men as possible rather than continue fighting a losing battle and losing more troops than needed, ordered a hasteful retreat. This may have saved his army, but would mean giving up Philly in the process.
Just a month after, Washington would find himself in a prime position to take the fight back to the British by surprise attacking a detachment of the original army from Brandywine a month earlier in Germantown, just a few miles north of downtown Philly. A battle plan was laid out to encircle the British and attack at once, catching them off guard. Unfortunately, weather would show up just in time to ruin the battle once again. Thick fog rolled in just as the troops were moving into position, forcing units to become separated and disorganized. Since everyone was falling out of unison, it meant the attack would kick off at different times throughout the lines, completely dropping the element of surprise of most of Washington's forces, allowing the British to collect themselves and get into defensive positions. As the battle went on, Washington's forces became bogged down and lost all of their momentum. With sections becoming so disoriented from the fog, they started skirmishing with themselves, confusing their own men as the enemy, forcing Washington to call off the attack and retreat once again.
After a couple long seasons of fighting and dealing with troublesome supply shortages, it was time for the Constitutional Army to set up camp for the winter. Even though they had endured 2 defeats from the British, resulting in losing Philadelphia, spirits were generally high within the troops. They had just gone toe-to-toe with some of the best armies in the world at the time and came close to winning. It had just been a very long campaigning season, traveling throughout the colonies to fight them. So everyone was just tired and needed some time to rest, heal, and just generally reorganize and recuperate during the winter months. Washington took his time to find just the right place to camp his army for the winter, looking for a good defensible position while also staying just far away from Philly so he would be able to have time to prepare for an attack if the British would march out to them, but also close enough to make sure the occupying forces knew they were lingering nearby. And so he chose the plateau of Valley Forge. The Continental Army would march into camp on December 19th, 1777, with about 12,000 troops and hundreds of supporting members as well. So this wasn't just some small army camp with a couple raggedy old tents. No, this was a full-fledged, almost city, and it just showed up here overnight, which it did technically become one of the top 5 biggest population centers in the colonies. Just imagine that some of these other areas have many years, and this one just showed up, and they had to build then and there. The men would quickly move into building living spaces for everyone, constructing over 1,500 log cabins, just like the one back here behind us, throughout the plateau. This significantly helped the men stay protected from the winter elements throughout their stay. The troops would build miles of trenches throughout the perimeter of this plateau and the overall camp, and create a series of earthen forts along the way, just like the one we're standing in right now. They were basically built with these wood walls with a thick layer of earth to take any cannon fire firing back. And then in the middle of the forts, right behind us right here, is the storage bin for the cannonballs and extra black powder. So it was basically like a makeshift root cellar, just to give it a little more protection for any outside fire coming in. Because you don't want your entire cache to get hit and then take the entire fort out. That would kind of defeat the purpose. So you did have to make a little bit of protection. It's almost like a much simpler version of what was built at Fort McHenry, with their gunpowder and ammunition stores being kind of in those underground earthen embankments with layers of concrete and stone and then earth on top to absorb shell hits, just so you don't have this catastrophic explosion of all your reserves. All of this extensive building was also great for the men and just kind of keeping them busy during their winter stay. And it kept them warm as well, so they're not just like sitting around on the cold days doing nothing, waiting for frostbite to take hold. It gave them an activity to do to keep their bodies moving and fresh, and like I said, generally just kind of warmed up and ready to go. With the infrastructure not stopping there, they even eventually built an impressively large bridge over the Schuylkill River, opening up easier access trade to farmers on the other side. The army, for the first few months or so, was in relatively good shape. They were receiving enough supplies to get by and keep chugging on along. Any shortfalls were met by local farmers and general hunting and gathering throughout the entire area. And one of those supplies that they were foraging for was timber, because all of those log huts didn't just build themselves, and the timber wasn't just shipped in from somewhere else. They picked this landscape clean of timber for miles around, but which, as you can see today, it's come back relatively well due to conservation efforts over the years since the camp was here. But as the weeks ticked on by, supply shipments and Continental Congress were becoming increasingly shy of the desired amounts of goods to keep everyone supplied with clothing and food, placing more pressure on the local farmers who would quickly run low on stores as well. Diseases like influenza, typhus, typhoid, and dysentery began to run rampant throughout the camp, which wasn't really uncommon at the time, with a bulk of the diseases appearing throughout the winter and was at its peak during the spring. This would end up killing about 2,000 men in the process, which could have been much worse if not for the supporting members of the community, like nurses, surgeons, and sanitation rules implemented by Washington and his staff. And the real size and scale of this entire camp is really hard to show in just this video. The trail just encompassing this whole thing is a little over 7 miles, and one of the staples here is right behind us. This is where the magic happened. This is the HQ where Washington and his support staff were running the ins and outs of this military town. At its peak, housing more than 20,000 people, all being managed out of this small house right behind us. So, even though the war has been raging on now for 2 years, the Continental Army still only resembled a ragtag force full of a bunch of random militias stuck together. And really they weren't this like cohesive fighting force just yet. So the Continental Congress and George Washington more or less kind of knew the major issues that needed to be fixed. Well, Washington had more hands-on perspective of it, but he was telling Continental Congress what needed to be fixed before they would start once again bringing the fight against the British. So, in February, a man waltzed into camp claiming to be their saving grace. Baron von Steuben was born in 1730 in what was known at that time as Prussia. This included land predominantly in current-day Germany, Russia, and Poland. Through his youth, he had moved around different areas in the region, eventually finding himself in the Prussian military, serving from 1747 through 1763. He experienced a good amount of activity while fighting in the 7 Years' War, or also known as the French and Indian War. Once it concluded, he was discharged. Since there wasn't any major conflicts going on for them at the time, they just didn't need such a large military presence. During his extended military service, he quickly moved up the ranks, starting at Lance Corporal and going all the way up to Captain. And after being discharged, he would move into a position called Grand Marshal within the court system, and would work here well into the 1770s, when he eventually found himself low on funds and acquiring a lot of financial debt. So he started to attempt to re-enlist in the military, but every country he turned to rejected his pleas. So, in a last-ditch effort, Steuben reached out to Louis de Saint-Germain, or Germain or Germain, not really sure how to pronounce that last name, the French Minister of War, to see if he could go to the Americas and help with the Revolutionary War, since there were rumors swirling around that they were paying handsomely for experienced officers. Steuben was quickly set up to meet with Ben Franklin and Silas Dean, another name I'm gonna butcher, by his friend to work out a possible contract. Unfortunately, it didn't really go as it expected for him, because they couldn't offer to pay for his services at that time. With his hope completely shattered from this news, Steuben needed some time to consider the offer. After quite a few days of pacing back and forth, thinking about this offer, and having to really cool his head and really just look at the circumstances he was in, he reluctantly accepted. With a long journey across the Atlantic ahead, he swiftly prepared and left for the colonies. Once arriving, he traveled directly to the Continental Congress, where he was able to negotiate an actual deal for payment. They told him he would be paid at the end of the war based on all the contributions he had given them. After the meeting and contract was finalized with Continental Congress, they quickly sent him out to Valley Forge, which is where we're standing at right now. Arriving in February of 1778, where he met with Washington and got to work reforming this ragtag army. He created an ingeniously simple code of rules and training that could be universally taught to train everyone in the camp. So he began to pull 100 troops from each brigade to personally be trained by him. They were then tasked to go back to their brigade and train the rest of the troops. And almost all that training happened in the very fields right behind us. He would quickly earn the respect from his peers because of his excellent teaching and no-nonsense attitude. This respect went both ways too, since he was able to finish training in just 2 months for something that normally took a lot of armies years to develop. This greatly impressed him by how fast the military became a cohesive fighting machine. This made everyone throughout all the ranks eager to go on their first bout against the British. Steuben would eventually go to create a full-fledged handbook for the military. This was widely adopted by the revolutionary armies and further on, setting a base system of rankings, trainings, and disciplines for everyone now and in the future to follow. And the man right behind us is Baron von Steuben, commemorated here in this large statue for all of his achievements right here in Valley Forge. Before the battle plans could get moving, the supply shortages needed to be desperately met. You simply cannot go fight long, drawn-out skirmishes low on food, ammo, and other supplies. If you cannot properly feed and clothe your own forces, why would they want to stick around and fight ill-prepared? Washington would write a few pleas to the Continental Congress throughout the winter that the supply issues were getting worse. He was really beginning to worry about losing morale within the army. This would take some time because a new quartermaster wouldn't be named until March. Nathaniel Greene reluctantly answered the call because he would rather be on the front lines commanding his men. He was worried he would be lost to history and thought only the commanders on the front lines in the battles would be remembered. Little did he know at the time, this would become his claim to fame. He would only agree if he was promised to go back to a commanding general once these duties were complete. Some of his first acts as this new quartermaster general was to bring on 2 others to help manage the finances and supply lines. Men named John Cox and Charles Petit. He would quickly set out on a top-to-bottom investigation of the department and reorganize absolutely everything. Discovering the previous officers running this department were an absolute mess and held horrible records of how many supplies they had, where they were, and also ruining most merchant relationships around the colonies because of missing payments, unfinished deals, and just zero communication. He and his team worked tirelessly to fix all of the issues plaguing the supply chain, and it didn't go unnoticed. He was able to reestablish regular and abundant supply runs into Valley Forge within a couple weeks of taking over. A relieved Washington praised the quick turnaround, and so did the army as a whole in general, bringing morale up quickly within the bustling camp. His exploits didn't just stop there. He was able to accomplish all of his goals with making the department competent again, bringing supply lines back online, and fixing relations with merchants. He was even able to create resupply caches for the army once they leave Valley Forge, giving them a quick emergency access to anything they may need while the battles ramped back up. It is June of 1778. A well-supplied and newly trained Continental Army was eager to show off what they could do to the British. Word would come in from Patriot spies that the British occupying forces in Philadelphia were leaving, heading back to New York. Washington would take some of his army to surprise them on their march back, and so a plan was put together and the Battle of Monmouth was on. Falling into place, Washington's forces were getting set up and ready for battle. But unfortunately, this battle wouldn't go exactly to plan. One of the forward marching generals, Charles Lee, would be the main issue, and the first to make contact with the British forces. And the plan was for him to do this, basically to get the British attention to push, thinking it's a smaller force. Then Washington would move up in and reinforce him, becoming a trap. But that isn't quite what happened. At the start of the battle, Charles was overwhelmed and terrified of that imposing British force coming straight at him. Fearing for his own life and his men's life, he quickly set out on an all-out retreat, losing his own confidence and a confidence from his men. Not soon after this, Washington, continuing on with the plan, would run into all of these fleeing forces. Washington's quick thinking and reorganization saved them from absolute and complete disaster. After some reshuffling, he continued on with the plan, once again completely losing the element of surprise, just like the Battle of Germantown in the fall. The battle would continue on with a much more successful continuation compared to the start. Both sides dug in with attacks coming from really both armies, just trying to get some kind of an advantage. This would go on throughout the entire sweltering June day. By the evening, the British would eventually just pull back due to general fatigue of the troops. And Washington controversially followed suit with his own men, understanding they were just too tired and needed a break. The heat was really starting to show, and a lot of men were starting to suffer from heat illnesses. So the battle basically ended up in a draw, which normally, yes, this may not be the best outcome, or an outcome most would think is good, but this was huge for the revolutionary movement. Taking on the British army, well outmanned, and fighting them into a draw was huge for the Continental forces. It was proof they really could have a legitimate chance against one of the best militaries in the world. Helped by fresh tactics and training, supplied by efficient and consistent supply lines, and new life would breathe into the Patriots' cause and become a moral turning point at the time for the colonies. But this war was far from over, and something we will definitely have to come back to. Well, that brings us to the end of today's history venture, where we were able to get hands-on with Valley Forge and the immense impacts it had on the Continental Army and Revolutionary War, going over how a pair of defeats in Brandywine and Germantown, an ill-supplied army winter camp, and a man named Baron von Steuben all linked together in today's historic venture. Thank you for watching the video, and make sure to subscribe for more if you like this one, of course. I'm trying to make about one of these a month, so this isn't just like some one-off video I'm doing in general. And for the future, hopefully it grows enough so that we can explore some larger stories throughout the US and possibly outside of it. And so let me know of any kind of cool or unique, interesting stories we can cover in the future. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one.